Talk 760 WJR. Here's Tom Jordan and Kevin Deitz.
All right, welcome back to the program. Sorry we had a bit of technical difficulties there, but Mike Pence has come out over the weekend with a major disagreement with former President Donald Trump about January 6th and Mike Pence's role as vice president in the election. And Donald Trump had said that he had a right to overturn it and send it back to the states. Mike Pence said, no, I did not. And that's where the disagreement stands today.
Yeah, joining us now is Dave Dulio, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Political Science, Professor at Oakland University. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm well, guys. How are you?
Good. I always thought Mike Pence was, for the most part, does the right thing or tries to do the right thing. This is a very difficult situation. I've always felt like Mike Pence was a loyal vice president, but he was going to do his job and follow the Constitution. Now he's speaking out a little stronger. What do you make of his comments over the weekend?
Well, Kevin, I think you're right. He's always been consistent in at least the public statements about the oath that he took to protect and defend the Constitution. And I think that's continuing. He was at an event over the weekend, as you've mentioned, where he made these very clear comments that contradict what his former boss believes about that issue. And, if there's one thing that's certain, I think it's that if Donald Trump runs again, we know who is not going to be his vice presidential pick.
Yeah, that's for sure. That split is there. Do you see Mike Pence having any additional political desires to try and run for president or something else?
Well, that's always been rumored in the last year or so that Pence may in fact, throw his hat in the ring for 2024. Well, I was going to say there's a long time until that decision gets made, but in fact, there really isn't. We're seeing folks lay the groundwork now, even if it's not front page news, that those conversations are indeed happening with some other potential candidates. There's no doubt. So I think that Pence is certainly one of those that is credibly mentioned as a potential candidate. But I think that, of all those other ones that are out there, whether it's Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton or Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, Pence is maybe in the biggest pickle, right? Where because he's so tied to Trump, if he tries to distance himself, which he clearly is, but if he continues to try to do that, how does that play with the Republican base? What does that sort of position himself where he can be successful in a Republican primary?
Going back to the Electoral Count Act that Mike Pence found himself kind of center stage in as vice president, he said that elections are conducted at the state level, not by Congress, and that the only role of Congress with respect to the Electoral College is to count the votes that were certified by the states. He said no more, no less. And so Trump said he could have sent those votes back on January 6th to the states for reevaluation. A, is that true? And B, how could that possibly have changed things, seeing that even to date, no state has agreed that the outcome would have been changed?
I think you're right on the money there, Tom. The crux of this issue is what votes were counted, what votes would be counted, and we're seeing that play out right with the here in Michigan with the alternative slate of electors that was sent forward by some Republicans who happened to get together in December of 2020 and file their own paperwork and send it off to the archives. Of that, of course, is being investigated by the committee that's on Capitol Hill in the U.S. House right now. I guess I'd say this. One, 2020 was not the first time that electoral votes were challenged in the Congress. They were challenged in 2004 by one senator and one U.S. House member, Stephanie Tubbs Jones in the House, a Democrat from Ohio, and Barbara Boxer, a Democrat from California. And it went through the process of being evaluated and voted on by both chambers, and it was dismissed, right? It was adjudicated, it was decided. The difference between that instance and others is 2020 was just on a much bigger level. More House members and senators came forward to say that they would challenge some of the electoral votes, and that was really what set us on the path to today, and continuing this conversation about this issue, as well as the Electoral Count Act and potential reforms to it. This is not as I said, not the first time that electoral votes have been challenged, but it certainly is the most controversial.
Mike Pence is talking about January 6th now this past weekend. Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, is talking about it as well. Both of them agree that we need to move on from this idea that that the election was stolen in 2020 and talk about the other issues. But Donald Trump is not willing to do that. And yet all three of them are likely presidential contenders in 2024. Do you think talking about this at this juncture is an attempt to create a differential between the Republican candidates leading up to both the midterms and also the presidential election?
I think it's much more about 2024, if anything, than 2022. I think that the 2022 congressional races, as well as statewide and state-level offices, like we have here in Michigan, those are going to be decided about issues that are important to those races themselves, right? And congressional elections are usually won and lost based on issues that matter in those particular districts. And frankly, in most of the races around the country, I don't think that this is going to be, at the end of the day, a deciding issue. It could very well be important in some primary elections among Republican congressional candidates. But when it comes to the general election, where those Republicans who survive primaries are going to face off against the Democrat, I think that it becomes a much more problematic issue, if only because the folks that are going to decide those elections, in the vast majority of cases, those independent voters or swing voters or persuadable voters, whatever we want to call them, they are not worried about 2020. They are worried about today and moving forward and looking ahead. And they want somebody, I'm convinced, in office who is going to talk to them about their lives improving as we move into not just 2022, but 23 and beyond.
Yeah, and those are the voters that I think both Republicans and Democrats really want to appease and try to convince them to vote for their parties. Thanks so much, Dave Dulio, Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Political Science Professor at Oakland University. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
All right.